What's up, guys? Acosta here to discuss the divisions of the peripheral nervous system. So we've already discussed what the components of the central nervous system are, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. And the subdivisions within the peripheral nervous system include, first off, you have the motor division, and then you also have, so I'll put this over here in blue, this is the sensory division. And the subsystems within the motor division include the somatic motor, as well as the visceral motor. So when we say soma is referring to body, so referring to the body, compared to visceral, which is referring to the organs. So another term that we can use besides motor is efferent. So efferent or motor, what these are saying is the direction in which the neural impulse is traveling. So when we say motor or efferent, we're saying that the signal is going from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. So the specific subdivision, the somatic motor, what this refers to is voluntary control. So it's voluntary control of our skeletal muscles. So in order for me to contract my biceps, the signal has to go from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. So it's going to go from the brain at a particular region, which is known as the primary motor cortex. And the primary motor cortex is found within the precentral gyri. So this is a particular region in the brain that you identified here in lab. So if you think about it, you have that signal which is going from the brain at the precentral gyri, travels through the spinal cord where tracts are, and then it goes out to where the peripheral nerves are until the signal finally gets to the neuromuscular junction, in which the release of acetylcholine will initiate the contraction of the skeletal muscle. Okay, so that's here for the somatic motor division. You also have the visceral motor division. So this is an involuntary system, meaning that you do not have control over it. And another term for the visceral motor system is known as the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is divided into two subdivisions. You have the parasympathetic as well as the sympathetic division. So another term for sympathetic, or another how we describe it, we call this the fight or flight response, and then parasympathetic is the rest and digest response. So the effect that it has, remember again, what does visceral mean? Visceral means organs. And some of the particular organs that will be affected by these different subdivisions. So for instance, the heart, the lungs, as well as the GI tract. So we're going to dive into the details a little bit later on the specifics of the visceral motor division. But just to give you a preview of it, so for the sympathetic, what happens with heart rate, with blood pressure, a situation in which you're running from a bear, that's like the classic example. Heart rate is going to increase, so is your blood pressure in order to get away from that bear. But if you're after eating a big meal, right, heart rate, blood pressure, those things are going to decrease for when you stimulate the parasympathetic division. Okay, so we've now discussed the visceral motor, the somatic motor divisions within the peripheral nervous system. So now let's get into the sensory division. So the sensory division, you have the somatic sensory. And the somatic sensory division, so what this relates to is our senses. For instance, touch. So touch, our interpretation of pain, pressure. So touch, pain, pressure. These are all things that they have to travel from where? They have to go from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. And so what particular region within the central nervous system is it going to go to? Well, these signals, they travel to primarily the post-central gyri. So that's that particular region that you identified on the brain today. And the post-central gyri, the term to describe the function of it is the primary somatosensory cortex. Because our senses from our body, right, that's the signal is going from the peripheral nervous system, right, from the peripheral nerves through the tracts all the way up until it gets to this region here within the brain. So this is the somatic sensory division here. Okay, so then the last one to discuss here is the visceral sensory. The visceral sensory, this is referring to what? It's referring to our organs. So for instance, within the stomach, if you stimulate some of the free nerve endings, that signal will be transmitted from the stomach all the way to the brain. So once again, we're going from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. And once again, what's the other term to describe the sensory division? We don't say that it's efferent, we say that it's afferent. Okay, so that's going to do it for this lecture.